Welcome to the channel.
I guess I always knew something was off, but I never thought it'd be this off. Heather and I had been married for 5 years, and the truth is, I'd gotten comfortable. Too comfortable, maybe. We had a routine: work, dinner, weekends at her parents' place, the occasional road trip. Nothing out of the ordinary, you know? But somewhere along the way, things changed, and I didn't see it. It all started when I found the condom wrapper in the trash. It was tucked under some pizza boxes, and at first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe I just missed it during our last cleanup. But when I picked it up, I realized it was one of those fancy ones she always used to buy when we'd go on vacations. The brand we joked about being too fancy for us. That should have been my first sign, but I ignored it. Then I saw the text messages. It was like everything clicked into place all at once. Heather had this habit of leaving her phone around, always within arm's reach. She never thought to lock it, not because she trusted me, but because she knew I never cared to snoop. But that morning, something told me to check it. I can't explain why, but I did. The messages were between her and Josh, my best friend. I'd known him since college. Hell, we were practically brothers. But there they were, texting like they were lovers, hiding it behind jokes and emojis like it was nothing. The words stung like fire. "Can't wait to see you tonight, miss you already." And then a message from Josh that made my stomach drop. "Your husband is so oblivious, babe." I froze. I wanted to throw up, but I couldn't move. My mind was a blur of anger, confusion, and betrayal. Josh? My best friend? And Heather? She'd been lying to me for months. Hell, maybe longer. It took me a while to process, but then the anger kicked in. I didn't say anything to Heather that day. I just walked around in a daze, trying to act like everything was normal. But I knew I had to find out more. So, I hired a private investigator. I don't know why I didn't confront her right then. Maybe I was still in shock. Or maybe I wanted proof. Proof that my best friend and my wife were in this together, ruining everything we had. It took a week for the private investigator to get back to me. In that week, I barely slept. I would lie awake at night, replaying the messages in my head, picturing Heather and Josh together. Sometimes I would just sit there, thinking about how I could have missed it. How I could have been so blind. The investigator came through with everything I needed: photos, footage, timestamps. They'd been meeting for months. Every time I thought I had a grasp on the situation, it just kept getting worse. There were moments when I thought maybe I was just overreacting, but then I'd look at the proof and know this was real. The worst part? Heather never even tried to hide it. When I saw the pictures of her and Josh leaving a hotel together, it was like a punch to the gut. They were laughing, holding hands, looking so comfortable, like they were in a different world, one where I didn't exist. I had to step away from the situation. I couldn't process it in one go. I needed to make a plan. Something, anything, to get back at them both. I wasn't going to just let them walk away scot-free. I called Josh the next day. I didn't even know what to say to him. My heart was racing, and I could feel the anger in my throat as I dialed his number. When he picked up, I had to force the words out. I said I needed to talk to him in person. He was surprised but agreed, and we set a time for later that night. I didn't tell Heather I was going. I didn't owe her anything. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I needed to confront Josh. I had to hear it from him. I wanted to see his face when I told him I knew everything. When I met him at the bar, he was already there, nursing a beer. As soon as he saw me, he gave me that stupid, half smile of his, like everything was fine. I could feel the blood rush to my face. I was ready to explode. But I kept my cool, barely. I sat down across from him, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "I know about you and Heather." His face went white, but he tried to cover it up with some weak excuse. Man, it's not what you think. I didn't let him finish. Cut the crap, Josh. I saw the messages. I have the photos. Don't lie to me. He froze for a second, then he started apologizing, saying how sorry he was, how it just happened, and how things were complicated. But it was all bullshit. I wasn't listening anymore. I just stared at him, the anger bubbling up inside me, and then I hit him. Right across the face. The sound of my fist hitting his skin felt good, in a twisted way. I had never hit anyone before. But this was different. This was the betrayal of a lifetime. And I needed him to feel just a fraction of the pain I felt. He staggered back, holding his face, eyes wide with shock. I want you out of my life, Josh, I said, my voice shaking with rage. And you're going to pay for what you've done. He stood there speechless, probably thinking I'd back down or apologize. But I wasn't done. I was just getting started. The whole way home, I felt this mixture of emotions, anger, confusion, and even relief. I had confronted Josh, but now what? What the hell was I supposed to do next? I couldn't just let Heather off the hook either. I had to make her feel what I was feeling. I needed to make her understand the depth of her betrayal. But first, I needed to think about how I could make Josh pay for what he did to me, both of them. And that's when the idea hit me. I wasn't going to just sit back and let them destroy everything we built. No, I was going to make them pay, in the worst way possible. After confronting Josh, I felt a little better. Just a little. But punching him wasn't enough. Not even close. They had both stabbed me in the back, and I wasn't going to walk away without making them suffer the way I had. I wasn't the kind of guy who could just forgive and move on. I needed something bigger. Something they'd never recover from. So I started thinking. Really thinking. And then, it hit me, Carla. Carla was Josh's wife. Sweet girl. She didn't deserve this, but neither did I. And if I was going to get back at them, I needed her. If there was one way to destroy Josh's life the way he destroyed mine, it was through her. Now, I wasn't just going to tell her outright. No, that would have been too easy. If I was going to do this, I needed to make sure it hit hard. I wanted Josh to feel what it was like to lose everything in the most humiliating way possible. Step 1. Planting the seed. I started small. A few casual run-ins with Carla. Friendly conversations. I acted normal. No signs of anger. No signs of what I knew. I just let things happen naturally. One day, I, accidentally, ran into her at the grocery store. She smiled, but I could tell something was off. Hey, it's been a while, I said, grabbing a six-pack from the shelf. She gave me a half-hearted smile. Yeah, things have just been busy. Busy. Right. I played it cool. How's Josh? At the mention of his name, her expression changed. Just for a split second, but I saw it. She hesitated before saying, He's fine. You know how he is. That told me everything I needed to know. She felt something was off. Maybe she didn't know, maybe she had suspicions, but she wasn't blind. Step 2. The truth, but not from me. I knew if I told Carla about Josh and Heather, she might not believe me. Or worse, she'd confront Josh right away, and he'd find a way to spin it. I needed her to catch them herself. So I set it up. I started paying more attention to Heather's schedule, watching for patterns. And sure enough, every Thursday afternoon, she had a yoga class. Only, I knew that class didn't exist. The private investigator had confirmed that Thursdays were their day. So one Thursday, I called Carla. Hey, this is gonna sound weird, but do you want to grab a coffee? She was surprised. I mean, we'd never hung out just the two of us. But she agreed. We met up at this quiet little cafe, and I could tell she was nervous. She kept glancing at her phone like she was waiting for a message. "Carla, I need to tell you something, but I don't want you to take my word for it," I said carefully. She frowned. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, then sighed. "I think you should check where Josh is right now." She looked confused, but something in my voice must have made her listen. She picked up her phone and called him. He didn't answer. Then she texted. No reply. That's when she started looking worried. "Where did you say he was supposed to be?" I asked. "He told me he had to stay late at work," she said slowly. "Want to go find out?" She hesitated, but I saw the shift in her. She wanted to know. Even if she wasn't ready for the truth, she needed to see it for herself. So we went. I already knew where they were. Some hotel just outside of town. The same one from the photos the investigator had given me. When we pulled into the parking lot, Carla was shaking. I didn't say anything. I just let her process. Then we saw them. Heather and Josh walked out of the hotel like they didn't have a care in the world. Heather was laughing at something, her hand brushing against his arm. It was disgusting. Carla just froze. She stared at them, her breathing uneven, like her whole world was crumbling right there in front of her. I thought she'd scream or cry, but she didn't. She just clenched her jaw, grabbed her phone, and snapped a photo. Then, without a word, she got back in the car. I followed. We sat there in silence for a long time. I didn't push her. I knew exactly what she was feeling because I had felt it too. But then, she spoke. "How long have you known?" I exhaled. "A few weeks." She turned to me, and for the first time, I saw it. That same anger, that same need for revenge that had been burning inside me since the moment I found out. "We're going to make them pay," she whispered. I didn't even have to convince her. She was already there. And that's when I knew this was only the beginning. The next few days were a blur. I kept my distance from Heather, trying to act like everything was fine. But in my head, all I could think about was Carla and what we had just witnessed. I knew she was torn, still processing everything, but she didn't seem like the type to back down. I started talking to her more, just checking in. Small conversations turned into longer ones. And it became clear she was just as angry as I was. Not just about what Josh had done to me, but what he had done to her. The more we talked, the more she revealed how much she'd been in the dark, how Josh had been pulling away from her for months. She didn't know why, but she felt it. The distance. The coldness. Eventually, I brought up the idea. I wasn't sure how she'd take it, but I had to know. "What if we made them regret this?" She was quiet for a moment, and I thought I'd pushed too far. But then she looked at me, a fire in her eyes. "What did you have in mind?" I smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that came with a plan. "We're going to make Josh raise a kid that isn't his. That's how we make him pay." Carla was silent for a moment, digesting the words. Then she nodded slowly. "You think I can get pregnant by you?" I nodded back. "It's not just about you and me. It's about him. It's about him thinking everything's fine while we destroy his world from the inside out. Every time he looks at that kid, he'll be reminded of how he betrayed you and me. And every time he looks at you, he'll know you did this to him." She looked at me like she was considering it. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, and I knew she was tempted. It wasn't just revenge for her. It was a way to take back control. After everything Josh had done to her, after all the lies, this was her way of getting back at him. I could tell she liked the idea more than she let on. We didn't rush it. We made sure everything was in place first. Carla needed time to come to terms with it, to make sure she was on board, because once this started, there would be no turning back. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about destroying the entire life they had built. For the next few weeks, we spent time together, talking more, playing more, and getting closer. The chemistry between us grew, and I could see her slowly shedding the last of the anger and hurt from Josh's betrayal. She was starting to feel alive again. She was starting to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: control. But this wasn't just about control for her. This was about something bigger. It was about making Josh face the consequences of his actions in the most personal way possible. We made our move when the time was right. One night, when Josh was out with his friends, Carla invited me over to her place. The plan was set. We were going to make it happen. When I showed up, Carla was waiting for me. She didn't say anything at first, just led me inside, and then we talked briefly about what we were about to do. There was no going back now. We couldn't afford any doubts. And just like that, we took the first step. It was strange, intense. And yet, with every kiss, every touch, I could feel the satisfaction growing. Not because I wanted her, though I did, but because I knew we were taking control. Taking the power back. The next morning, as I left her place, the weight of it hit me. This wasn't just some revenge affair. It was calculated. It was personal. We had just set the stage for the ultimate payback. And now, we had to wait. The next few weeks passed in a blur of tension and anticipation. Every time I saw Josh, I could barely look him in the eye. He was acting like everything was normal, completely oblivious to what we were doing behind his back. I almost laughed at how easy it was. But the real test was yet to come. We had to wait and see if Carla was really pregnant. It wasn't just a matter of timing. We needed everything to line up perfectly. If she was pregnant, it would all come crashing down. Josh would have to raise a kid that wasn't his, all while knowing the truth. The silence between me and Heather was unbearable. I couldn't confront her about it yet. I had to wait. I had to make sure everything was lined up before I made my next move. And I knew, the longer I waited, the more this would hurt them both. But I couldn't help myself. I started to feel like I was finally winning. The weeks dragged on. Every day felt like an eternity, but I kept myself busy, pretending like nothing had changed. The tension between Heather and me grew, but I kept my distance. I wanted her to wonder. I wanted her to feel the heat of her own guilt, to feel like she was the one being hunted. Josh didn't seem to notice. He was still his same cocky self, laughing about whatever nonsense he was into, pretending everything was fine. I wanted to scream every time I saw him. The guy didn't even have the decency to feel ashamed. But I stayed calm. I stayed patient. Carla was still in touch, but we kept everything low-key. The last thing I needed was Heather catching wind of anything. She had no idea what was coming, and I wasn't about to make it easy for her. Carla hadn't said anything about the pregnancy yet, and I was starting to get nervous. Was it working? Was she late? Every time I asked her, she just gave me a vague answer. "We'll know soon enough." But I didn't know if I could wait much longer. My thoughts were consumed with the idea of Josh raising a kid that wasn't his. I couldn't get it out of my head. And the longer it took, the more impatient I became. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from Carla one afternoon while I was at work. My heart stopped when I saw it. "I'm late," the text read. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out if I was reading it right. I wanted to text back immediately, but I held off, not wanting to seem too eager. I didn't want to screw this up. That night, we met again at her place. The air between us was thick with anticipation. She didn't say much when I walked in, but I could tell. I could feel it, the tension, the excitement. We both knew that if this was true, everything was about to change. "I took a test," she said quietly, sitting down next to me on the couch. "It was positive." My heart raced. I leaned forward, trying to control the emotions that were threatening to explode. This was it. The moment that would destroy Josh's life, that would finally make him understand the pain he had caused me. Carla seemed nervous too. She rubbed her hands together, trying to steady her nerves. "Are you sure this is what you want?" she asked softly. I looked at her. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't want this." She nodded slowly, biting her lip. I could see that the reality of it was starting to sink in for her too. This wasn't just about getting back at Josh anymore. This was about changing everything. Once this was out in the open, there would be no turning back. We didn't say anything else. There was nothing more to say. We just sat there, letting the weight of the situation sink in. The next few days were tense. I didn't let on to anyone what was going on. Heather was still acting like everything was fine, and I played the role of the dutiful husband, even though every part of me wanted to tell her I knew. I wanted to tell her I had her number. But I held off. I wasn't done yet. Josh, of course, had no idea. He was still going on with his life like nothing had changed. It made me sick. Every time I saw him, I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to throw it in his face that I was about to ruin his life in the most personal way possible. But I didn't. I stayed silent. It was my turn to be patient. Then, the day finally came. Carla texted me with the news I had been waiting for. "I'm definitely pregnant." I couldn't stop myself from smiling. This was it. It was happening. Now all we had to do was wait for the right moment to bring it to light. I didn't know how I was going to do it yet, but I knew I'd figure it out. Heather and Josh were going to feel this. They were going to feel it so deeply that they would never recover. I could already imagine Josh's face when he found out the truth. He would never be able to look at Carla the same way again. And Heather? She'd be stuck in the middle, too, betrayed by both her best friend and her husband. This was going to be a masterpiece of revenge. The kind of thing they'd never see coming. And as much as I hated to admit it, a part of me was already starting to feel that familiar rush of satisfaction. The weeks leading up to the revelation were the hardest. It felt like everything was on the edge of a cliff, just waiting to topple over. I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of anticipation and dread every time I saw Heather or Josh. With Carla pregnant, I knew the time for subtlety was running out. I couldn't keep pretending forever. The longer I waited, the more my rage built up. Every time Josh acted like nothing was wrong, I wanted to scream at him, to make him understand the depth of his betrayal. But the plan had to unfold perfectly. Carla kept in touch, and every time we talked, the tension between us grew. She was scared. I could see it in her messages, her calls, and the way she was starting to distance herself. She didn't want to carry out the plan, not in the way we had imagined it. But I didn't care. I wasn't backing down now. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about making sure Josh felt the weight of his actions, the consequences of his decisions. I wasn't going to let him off the hook. She called me one night, her voice quiet, almost shaky. "I'm starting to feel bad about this," she admitted. "What if it destroys everything? What if it ruins me too?" I paused, standing in my kitchen, trying to control my own emotions. I could hear the fear in her voice, and for a moment, I considered backing off. But then I thought about Josh, how he didn't care about the damage he caused. How he was out there, living his life, while I was stuck with the consequences of their choices. "Carla," I said, my voice steady, "this is the only way he'll understand what he did. It's the only way he'll feel the weight of it. We're not just hurting him, we're giving him what he deserves. He can't get away with this. Neither of them can." There was a long silence on the other end, but eventually she sighed. "I know. I know you're right. But I'm scared. This is going to change everything." And just like that, she was back in it. We kept things quiet for the next few weeks. Every time I saw Heather, I was on edge. The way she looked at me, the way she seemed to almost sense that something was wrong, it unnerved me. I could tell she was getting suspicious. I had to hold it together. I couldn't let her catch on yet. Not until the time was right. Josh, on the other hand, had no idea. He was still his usual self, arrogant, carefree, and completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit him. Every time I saw him, I wondered how much longer I had before everything fell apart. Then came the day I decided I couldn't wait anymore. It had been too long, and every passing moment felt like torture. I wasn't going to let them drag this out any longer. I needed to confront them. It happened that weekend. I invited Josh to come over to my place. I made sure Heather would be out with her friends. She wouldn't be back for hours. The moment Josh walked through the door, I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. This was it. I could see the casual, confident way he looked at me, completely unaware of what was coming. "Hey man, what's up?" he said, walking into the living room with his usual cocky grin. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at him, trying to control the anger bubbling inside me. For a second, I thought about punching him again. But no. I had to make him feel it in the worst way possible. I needed him to understand the full weight of his betrayal. "I know about you and Heather," I said, my voice low but steady. He froze for a split second, just enough for me to see the panic flicker across his face. But then he recovered, his grin returning, though it was more forced this time. "Man, you're being paranoid. Nothing's going on," he said, trying to play it off. I wasn't buying it. "Don't lie to me, Josh. I know everything. The texts, the hotel room, everything." His face fell, and I saw the panic now. He was trying to backpedal, stuttering, saying things like, "It was a mistake," and "It wasn't like that." But I wasn't listening. I was done listening to his lies. "I want you to know, Josh," I said slowly, "you're going to be a father. Not in the way you think, though. You're going to raise a kid that isn't yours." He went pale, staring at me like he didn't understand what I was saying. "What?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "What are you talking about?" I looked at him with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Carla's pregnant, Josh. And it's not your kid." The color drained from his face, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then the rush of satisfaction hit me again. I had him. I had them both. He stood there frozen, unable to speak. I could see the shock in his eyes. It was like he couldn't process what was happening. The reality of it all was crashing down on him. I leaned in, my voice cold. "You've lost everything, Josh. And now, every time you look at that kid, every time you look at Carla, you'll know exactly what you did to me. To her. To us. And you'll never forget it." He took a step back, stumbling over his words, trying to come up with some excuse, but it was too late. The damage was done. I stood up, walking toward the door, not even looking back. "You can leave now. And don't bother coming back. This is over." Josh didn't say anything else. He just left, his world shattered, just like I had planned. But as I closed the door behind him, I realized something. This wasn't over. It wasn't just about Josh anymore. It was about Heather. About the aftermath. And now, I was ready to deal with that. The next few days felt like a blur, a whirlwind of emotions and tension. Josh was gone, and I knew the clock was ticking for Heather. She had no idea what had just happened, but I could feel her closing in on me. She was getting suspicious, asking more questions, looking at me like she could sense that something was off. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. No, I had to wait for the perfect moment. Heather and I had barely spoken since that night when I found the condom wrapper. She was acting like everything was normal, but I could see through the act. She was trying to play it cool, but every time I looked at her, I could see the guilt in her eyes. It was like she couldn't hide it anymore. I had made Josh face the truth. Now, it was her turn. She had to know that I knew everything, that she couldn't lie her way out of this. But the longer I waited, the more it ate at me. The anger was building again, and I could feel it bubbling beneath the surface every time she smiled at me or touched my arm. She didn't deserve any of it. She didn't deserve the comfort, the peace of mind, or the life we had built. She didn't deserve my loyalty, not after what she had done. But I wasn't going to be the one to start it. I wanted her to come to me. I wanted her to confess. I wanted to see her squirm. I wanted her to feel the weight of her lies, to understand that there was no escaping what was coming. I could see her struggling with herself. I could see her trying to come up with some excuse, some way to explain away everything that had happened. But she couldn't. Not this time. I had seen the messages. I had the proof. And now, it was all crashing down on her. I came home one night to find Heather sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale, her hands shaking. I knew it was time. She had finally cracked. "Sit down," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "We need to talk." I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, watching her, letting the silence drag on. I wanted her to feel it. I wanted her to feel the weight of the moment. Finally, I sat down across from her. "What's going on, Heather?" I asked, my voice cold calm. I could see her eyes flicker with guilt, but she was trying to hold it together. She wasn't going to get away with this. Not this time. I don't know how to start," she said, her voice trembling. "I've messed up, Michael. I know I've hurt you." She was already apologizing, but it was too late. There was no turning back now. "Yeah," I said, leaning forward, my eyes locked on hers. "You have. You hurt me. You hurt us." She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. "I know everything, Heather. About you and Josh. The texts. The hotel. All of it." Her face went white, and I could see the panic rising in her eyes. She opened her mouth again, but no words came out. She was trying to formulate some lie, some excuse, but nothing was going to save her now. I stood up slowly, walking over to the counter. "You really thought you could hide it from me, huh? You thought you could do this behind my back and get away with it? You think I wouldn't find out?" She stood up too, her voice pleading now. "Michael, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. It was a mistake. It was just a mistake, and I never meant for it to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen." I couldn't stop the laughter that bubbled up in my chest. It was bitter, dark, and filled with rage. "A mistake? You call that a mistake? You've been lying to me for months, Heather. Months. And now you want me to believe it was just a mistake?" She looked like she was going to cry, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. "Please, Michael, don't do this. I love you. I do. I was lost. I didn't know what I was doing. I never meant to hurt you." I shook my head, my heart pounding in my chest. "You didn't mean to hurt me. Well, guess what? You did. You hurt me more than I could ever put into words. And now, you're going to have to deal with the consequences." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean? What consequences?" I leaned in close, my voice cold and unforgiving. "You think you're just going to walk away from this? No. You're going to face everything you've done. I'm done pretending, Heather. I'm done with the lies. And now you're going to watch as everything falls apart." She stood there in silence, her face crumbling as she realized the depth of what I was saying. She didn't know what to say anymore. And she didn't have an excuse that would make it right. "You're going to raise a kid that isn't yours, Heather," I said slowly, letting the words sink in. You and Josh both. And you're going to have to live with that for the rest of your lives." Her eyes were filled with shock and horror. She couldn't comprehend what I had just told her, but I knew the truth. I could see it in her face. She had no idea what was coming. I turned and walked toward the door, but before I left, I paused. "You made your bed, Heather. Now you're going to lie in it." And with that, I left. As I walked away, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't relief. It wasn't satisfaction. It was just the cold, hard reality settling in. The damage had been done. And now, they were going to feel every ounce of it. The days after I confronted Heather were strange. I expected her to break down, to beg for my forgiveness, to try and fix everything. But instead, she just stayed quiet. The house felt emptier than usual, like the air had been sucked out of it. I kept myself busy, just focusing on the next steps. The plan was still in motion, and I wasn't about to let it fall apart. Carla was more nervous than I was, constantly checking in, making sure things were still going according to plan. I reassured her. This wasn't going to be easy, but we were in it together now. But Heather didn't do anything. She didn't confront me. She didn't even seem angry, not at first. The silence between us was suffocating, like we were living in different worlds under the same roof. Finally, a week after I laid everything out for her, Heather spoke to me. She cornered me in the kitchen one evening while I was making dinner, her eyes red and puffy, like she hadn't been sleeping. She still hadn't come clean about everything, but there was something in her expression now, something desperate. "Michael," she said, her voice breaking, I can't keep pretending anymore. This has to stop." I turned around slowly, knife still in my hand. I wasn't sure what to expect. Part of me wanted to hear her admit everything, to finally see the guilt in her eyes, and know that she understood the damage she'd done. But all I could feel was exhaustion. "What do you mean, stop?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "You already stopped, didn't you? By sleeping with Josh. By lying to me for months. By making me feel like I was crazy. You stopped a long time ago." She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. She deserved to feel every ounce of pain I had been carrying. "I don't know how it happened," she said, tears welling up again. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen. But it did. And now I feel like I'm losing everything. I've ruined us." I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at her, my mind racing. I knew I could tear into her, say everything I wanted to say, but part of me just didn't care anymore. The damage was already done. "You haven't lost everything, Heather," I said quietly. "You've already lost it all. I just haven't decided what I'm going to do about it yet." She broke down then, her sobs filling the quiet kitchen. I didn't move toward her, didn't comfort her. She didn't deserve comfort. "I'm sorry," she kept saying, over and over again, like it would fix everything. "I never meant for it to go this far. Please just don't leave me. We can fix this." I didn't even want to hear it anymore. I was done with the apologies, done with the lies. I walked past her without saying another word and left the kitchen. The more she begged, the less I wanted to listen. But despite everything, I couldn't avoid the reality that was coming. Heather was going to have to face the consequences of what she did. And she wasn't going to like it. The next day, I did something I'd been putting off. I called Josh. He hadn't tried to contact me, which didn't surprise me. He was probably too humiliated by what had happened, and part of me liked that. But I needed to know where he stood. "Josh," I said when he picked up. I could hear the hesitation in his voice, but he didn't hang up. "Michael," he replied, his tone guarded. "You really want to do this? You and I both know what you did," I said, keeping my voice steady. You betrayed me. And now, it's your turn to pay for it. I've already given you the first taste of what's coming. But now, it's time for you to face Heather. She deserves to know what you've been doing to her, what both of you have been doing." He was silent for a long moment, and I could almost hear him trying to figure out what to say. "I'm sorry, man," he finally muttered. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I was selfish. I should have told you. I never meant to hurt you, not like this." I felt a twisted satisfaction in hearing his apology, but I wasn't about to let it slide. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Josh," I said coldly. "Sorry doesn't take back the betrayal. I'm not interested in your apologies. What I want is for you to face Heather. Tell her everything, Josh. You owe her that." There was more silence, and I could hear him breathing heavily. "You really want me to do that?" he asked, like he couldn't believe I was asking it. "I'm not asking you, Josh. I'm telling you. You owe her the truth. I'm done being the nice guy, the understanding husband. It's time for you to clean up your mess." We hung up after that. And for the first time since all this started, I felt like I was in control. Josh and Heather weren't going to dictate how this ended. I was going to take that power back. I was going to make them face everything. It was time for the final act. Later that week, Josh finally came over to confront Heather. I made sure to stay out of the house, but I watched from the window as he parked in front. I saw him walk up to the door, his head down like he knew the storm was coming. I didn't feel pity for him. I didn't even feel satisfaction. I just felt numb. It was happening. The fallout was here. I knew what was going to happen next. Heather would demand answers. She would be furious. But this time, it wasn't going to be about her apologizing. It was about her taking responsibility. And I knew that Josh would be forced to take responsibility too. What would happen after that? I didn't know, but I was ready for whatever came next. I didn't stay to watch it unfold, but I knew what was coming. The arguments, the lies, all of it was about to explode. I went to a cafe down the street, letting the tension build. Part of me wanted to be there, but I needed them to face this on their own. An hour later, I saw Josh standing by the curb, looking like a broken man. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale. I walked up to him. "How'd it go?" I asked. He shook his head. "She's furious. I didn't know how to tell her. I messed up." I held back the anger. "You chose to hide it. You had months to tell her." "I'm sorry, man," Josh said, looking defeated. "I ruined everything." "Does she know everything?" I asked. "Yeah. The texts, the hotel, all of it," he replied, guilt eating him alive. "She wants to leave me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't blame her. You deserve it," I said coldly. "You ruined it. You both did." Josh nodded, knowing there was no excuse left. "I know. I'll live with it every damn day." I turned and walked away. I didn't go back inside yet. I needed a moment to breathe, to clear my head. I sat at the park, thinking about Heather and how she used to be everything to me. Now, she was just a stranger. I texted Carla, telling her we'd talk soon, though I wasn't sure what I meant. The damage had been done. I had to wait for Heather's reaction. She'd realized there was no fixing this, no going back. The next morning, Heather tried again. She came into the kitchen, eyes swollen from crying. "Michael, can we just talk? Can we fix this?" I didn't even look at her at first. "Fix this?" I asked coldly. "How? By pretending nothing happened? By making excuses?" She sobbed, pleading. "I never meant to hurt you. Please, I'm so sorry. I don't know how it got this far." I shook my head. "It got this far because you chose it. You chose to betray me. You can't just erase that. She looked broken, but I didn't care anymore. You've already lost me, I said flatly. I'm done. I walked out, needing space, not knowing where I was going, just away from that house and that life. I ended up at the park, thinking about everything that had happened. My phone buzzed. It was Carla. I hadn't responded to her in days. Her message was simple. How are you holding up? I stared at it for a while, unsure how to answer. I wasn't okay. Nothing felt okay. Finally, I replied, I'm done. Everything's falling apart. Heather knows. Josh is gone. I don't know what to do anymore. She replied quickly. I'm here if you need to talk. I wasn't sure I was ready, but the weight of it all was too much. The storm wasn't over, but maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in it anymore.
Goodbye.